A federal judge out of California rules the Trump administration violated federal law by deploying National Guard troops amid protests in LA earlier this summer. Trump is threatening similar action in other U.S. cities, including Chicago. 21 News legal expert Matt Mangino is joining us now to weigh in on the legal limits of the White House and the president when it comes to these cases. Matt, the federal U.S. district judge issued a 52-page opinion. It's in all the big headlines today, saying the Trump administration violated a certain act. Can you break down what the judge is pointing to within the law? What did the administration violate?
Well, what's interesting about this, Lindsay, this is Judge Breyer from a federal district court in San Francisco. And you may recall that when the Trump administration originally sent National Guard troops to Los Angeles to help with the ICE investigations, Judge Breyer issued an injunction and said that had to stop. That decision was overturned by the federal appeals court. But the issue came up, is the Trump administration now violating a specific statute, which is called the Posse Comitatus statute. And that statute specifically says that federal troops cannot be used in civil law enforcement. And Judge Breyer has determined that the work of the ICE agents alongside of the federal troops in Los Angeles violated that, because the federal troops were actually involved in enforcement of civil laws.
We also saw the use of National Guard in Washington, D.C., but because D.C. is a district, it's not a state. Does that change how the law is applied?
It doesn't with regard to this specific issue of the Posse Comitatus statute. So this statute was written in 1878 and as a result of Reconstruction, because people in the South were concerned that federal troops were occupying the South as part of Reconstruction. So it's funny how this has evolved now into a situation where, urban areas, some of them northern areas, Washington, D.C., and possibly Chicago soon, are arguing that you can't use federal troops to enforce the law. They cannot be involved in law enforcement. And that's what Judge Breyer said was occurring in Los Angeles.
And when it comes to Chicago, the president is citing crime levels for possibly sending the National Guard troops there. Does the law require intervention with the city's law enforcement before they would make a decision like that? Would the law allow it if there was an agreement in place? Where do you see the line being drawn?
Well, traditionally, presidents have always gone first to the governor and asked for permission to use the National Guard, whether it was a time of war or, the statute also provides that you can federalize National Guards in times of insurrection. I'm not sure that the Trump administration can show that there is an insurrection going on in Chicago or the threat of an insurrection. So while they were cagey in terms of the Trump administration in saying that in Los Angeles, these troops are not going to enforce the law. They were only going to protect federal officers who were enforcing the law. How do you make that argument in Chicago? Because you're talking about the crime rate, and the crime rate is a civil law enforcement issue. It's not a military issue. So what is the National Guard going to do in Chicago?
Locally, many of us remember the deployment of the National Guard members at Kent State University in 1970. When else has the National Guard been deployed in modern U.S. history where the action was deemed legal at the time and the law was applied within the line of the law?
Well, an example would be in Alabama and Mississippi during desegregation, in which, first President Eisenhower and later President Kennedy sent federal troops in to enforce Brown versus the Board of Education, the desegregation of schools. And so, those were turbulent times, and there were confrontations between people from the Department of Justice and the governors of those states. In fact, Governor Wallace stood in the doorway in Alabama not to permit students to enroll and was actually physically removed by an assistant attorney general, Nicholas Katzenbach, from the doorway so that these students could actually walk in and register.
All right, Matt Mangino, 21 News legal expert, thank you for joining us again as we watch to see how all this could pan out moving forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay.